The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Wednesday, the 3rd of February, 2016, are currently trading with gold at $1,138.10 an ounce, silver $14.63 an ounce, Texas crude $29.88 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 370 U.S. currency. Today in history, the year 1966, the Luna 9 Russian spacecraft became the first unmanned probe to achieve a soft landing on the moon, or any other planetary body for that matter. Also known as the YE-6, number 13, it was the first probe to transmit photographic data to Earth from the lunar surface. In recent news, Sandra Merritt, one of the two indicted with tampering with governmental documents in order to create fake driver's license in a plot with anti-abortion activists to obtain the undercover video footage exposing Planned Parenthood for selling human body parts, turned herself into Texas authorities today. She posted her $2,000 bond and was later released. However, the news conference that she was scheduled to hold afterwards was canceled. David Daleiden, the main activist behind the videos, plans to turn himself over to authorities tomorrow, as attorneys have stated. He does ironically face an additional misdemeanor charge related to the purchase of human tissue. Ironic because, if you recall, a grand jury in Houston, Texas, that had been tasked with looking into the wrongdoing by Planned Parenthood announced that it was indicting Daleiden and Merritt instead. The results for the Iowa caucus are as follows. For the Republican Party, Ted Cruz, 8 delegates, or 27.7%. Donald Trump, 7 delegates, or 24.3%. Mark Rubio, 7 delegates, 23.1%. Ben Carson, 3 delegates, or 9.3%. Rand Paul, 1 delegate, 8,481 votes, 4.1%. Officially, Rand Paul did drop out this morning, stating the lack of funds and support as his main cause. Jeb Bush, 1 delegate at 2.8%. Carly Fiorina, 1 delegate, 1.9%. And John Kasich, 1 delegate at 1.9%. For the Democrats, it was actually decided by a coin toss which gave Hillary 6 wins out of 6 tosses. Hillary Clinton got 23 delegates and Bernie Sanders 21 delegates. This has been your lowdown for February 3rd, 2016.
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I have a joke for you. Okay. The government in this town is excellent and uses your tax dollars efficiently.
I didn't see it coming. Until it comes with the food.
Bitcoin is immune from attack almost completely. With Bitcoin, you actually gain far more from using that computing power to generate Bitcoin.
There's a system approaching perfection. It's in time for it to disappear. There's a system approaching perfection. It's in time for it to disappear.
We'll walk deeper into the belly of the beast if it means I'm able to further limit reckless government spending. I mean, I have so many ideas. Some are simple, like take down traffic lights and eliminate the post office. The bigger ones will be tougher, like bring all of this crumbling to the ground.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is The Crypto Show, a show dedicated to understanding the promise of currency, technology, and liberty in the pursuit of a free society. And if you believe like we do that such a society can and should exist, then join us, why don't you, as we parade through a world unbound by convention, a world sketched by the beauty of the human artist. Because each and every one of you listening right now is that artist. So for the next 2 hours, let go of your most sacred system of thought and entertain the possibility that maybe, just maybe, everything we've been told about currency, technology, and yes, even that dirty, dirty little word, anarchy, is only one part of an ever-expanding, ever-possible, complex universe of ideas, one that we simply refuse to explore. So what do you say, listeners? Let's do some universe exploring tonight and have some fun while we do it.
Libertarianism is all about individual liberty, and it should never be defined by the terms liberal or conservative.
And communism is no good.
That's right. Big swing and a miss.
Thank you, Ron Swanson.
And the reason why I played that is actually the film crew that is here in studio with us right now. That was one of the main questions that they had. What is libertarianism?
I did not know that. I was out for that question. Well, that's really awesome. And that's what this show is about, is spreading ideas, especially ideas that may be unfamiliar to a lot of people. And I think libertarianism is unfamiliar to a lot of people. A lot of people have heard of it. They may have a vague notion of what it is, but the real meat and potatoes of it, I think, is still something hidden from most people. Not on purpose, because libertarians are very open and straightforward about their belief system. And whenever someone asks, we're more than happy to talk endlessly about our ideas. I know I am. So I certainly hope they have more questions before they leave. And if not, I hope their filming of us will cause other people who eventually see this to have more questions. Well, speaking of libertarianism, or more specifically, anarchism, or if you like, voluntarism, which is a sort of happier, cleaner word for the same concept. We are going to be at Anarchapulco, the second annual conference, this coming, week and a half, I guess, if even that long. February, 19th through 21st is Anarchapulco in Acapulco, of course, put on by the Dollar Vigilante, Jeff Berwick, and the Crypto Show is excited to be there. And we're excited to be there with our guest, who I believe is on the line, David Robison. He was there for the first Anarchapulco. You can check out his interview with Jeff Berwick at Anarchast. I believe it's anarchast.com, but just Google Anarchast, and you'll find the website and David Robison's interview. It's a really good one. And so he'll be there as this year as well. And then immediately following Anarchapulco, he'll be a part of the 4th Rational Physics Conference. And we have him here to discuss just what exactly is rational physics. And in fact, as I discovered in watching his interview with Jeff Berwick, rational physics has something in common with libertarianism. And not just because they're both alternative or fringe ideas, but they share a sort of similar methodology, as it turns out, according to David. David, are you there?
I am, yes.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being on the Crypto Show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No, we're really excited. I love talking. Our show is about maybe 51% Bitcoin. And as much as I like talking about Bitcoin, I love talking about other stuff like libertarianism, alternative ideas like rational physics, and all sorts of other stuff. So I'm really excited to have you on.
Right on. Absolutely.
And we're also going to have on Lynn Ulbricht. Are we calling her this?
We're going to call her in the next segment, and she's going to say hello to David and thank him for what he's doing with this conference and why.
Right. And well, speaking of which, before we kind of dive into that, the conference, of course, like all conferences, is paid entry. But there's something special about this conference and where the proceeds of the money go. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The proceeds will be going to the Free Ross campaign.
Heck yeah.
So you get a physics class for $30.
That's cheap.
And what does the physics class entail?
Well, there's going to be 4 speakers there. So there'll be, have you guys heard of Bill Gates before?
Bill Gates. Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah, Bill Gates. Bill Gates, he's been putting these conferences on in past years, and they've all been in Europe. I went to the second one, which was in Salzburg, Austria, and had a really good time. So this time we're bringing him out here to Acapulco. So he'll be there speaking. There's another guy named Stephen Crothers, who, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Electric Universe. It's sort of the biggest alternative, I don't know if you want to call it a movement in astronomy and physics right now. And those conferences gather hundreds of people a year, and he speaks at those. He was going to make it down, but now he's only able to do a video conference because something else came up. But he will be doing a video conference. And then I have another guy named Mike Huttner, who's an independent thinker from Chicago. So they'll be discussing black holes, Big Bang, rational physics, the importance of language and definitions in science, and also the part I'm most excited about, which is Bill Gates' thread theory, which is his alternative theory.
I assume that's a take on string theory, obviously.
They're actually people say that they're way different, despite the name sounds very similar, but they're very different.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I can't wait to dive into that with you. Well, I'm glad it's Bill. How do you pronounce it again?
Gaede, so it's spelled Gaede, and it's Gaede. I believe
Bill
that's
Gaede.
Yeah.
I prefer him better to Bill Gates anyway, because Bill Gates is kind of anti-science because he pushes vaccines and non-open source software. So that's a better alternative, I think, to that elite individual. Well, that's really awesome. I'm really excited to discuss rational physics, and I would like to dive into the electric universe. I've heard a lot about it. I don't know much about it. I will say I did watch a really fascinating documentary. I think it was called Thunder of the Gods, and it was not exactly about the electric universe, but it used the electric universe as the basis for explaining celestial events in our solar system that account for oddities in the solar system, like the asteroid belt, the canals on Mars, which aren't actually created by water, but by electrical discharges. So we'll see if he has any comments about that. Well, in the meantime, I didn't really find a bio for you. So go ahead and just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm 29 years old. I do software development. I moved to Acapulco after coming here in 2015. I moved down here in June of last year. I was getting tired of the office environment, so I said, I'm done with this. I actually still do contract work for the same company that I was working for, so that's how I'm able to support myself down here so far.
And you totally regret it, right?
Oh, best decision ever. I love it. So I drove, bought a van, drove down here. It took 46 hours to drive here from Indianapolis.
Wow.
But it was a good time. I absolutely loved driving through Mexico. But yeah, I've been here for about 7 months now. And I would say I love, number one, the feeling of security that I have down here. Like when I was living back in Indy, I was constantly worried about break-ins or SWAT raids, even though we weren't doing anything that would warrant a SWAT raid. You never know.
Well, the SWAT raids are for your freedom. The police threaten you with violence for your freedom, by the way. I just want you to know that. Right. I need some re-education and reprogramming. Apparently somebody didn't go to public school long enough.
Yeah, right. And so I feel completely secure at my place down here. I don't worry about that at all. There's no SWAT raids. None of that happens. And the other thing is the people that I've met down here. It's so amazing. I wondered at first whether it was going to work, because even though we were all anarchists, would our personalities get along? And I was really cautious about that at first, but then it's just been incredible. Everybody has been awesome. Some of the best people I've ever met. So I would highly suggest to people, if you're on the fence about Anarchapulco, it's more than just coming down here and drinking tequila and listening to great speakers. It's the people that you meet makes it so worth it. You'll form friendships that will last a lifetime, guaranteed.
Well, that's really exciting. And of course, there is still tequila, so don't worry about that.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. You could form a hangover that would last a lifetime.
And I heard Jeff Berwick did just that last year. Yeah. Well, I'm really excited because my co-host Danny went last year. And even though he had broken his hip during work, he partied hard, had fun, and did a remote airing of our show from there.
Yeah, from Jeff's studio, actually.
Yeah, right from Jeff's studio. And so I'm excited to finally go. I really missed out. Jeff sounds like a lot of fun to party with. And the one thing I do regret is that James Corbett won't be there this year. Did you get to meet James Corbett?
I did, very, very, very briefly. Yeah, but it was only like a 2-sentence conversation. Everybody was trying to talk to him, so I didn't try to push it too hard. But yeah, very briefly, I got to meet him.
Had you heard of him prior, just out of curiosity?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
No, he's great. I love he's an incredible independent investigative journalist, really rational guy. Of course, CorbettReport.com. You can check out more about him. Well, we have a minute and a half left. Before we dive into anything, of course, we're going to have Lynn Ulbricht on the other side. But when you were here last year, did you give any speeches, or were you just kind of attending?
Nope, I was just attending.
Okay. And, of course, the Rational Physics Conference is subsequent to and separate from Anarchapulco. But are you giving an actual talk at Anarchapulco, or just attending this year as well?
Nope, just attending this year as well.
Cool. And so do you kind of see yourself indefinitely living in Acapulco, and as it grows into an anarchist haven, or just kind of see how it goes?
I would definitely think I would stay down here for another couple of years and try to help build the community as much as possible, because it's so much fun. There's new people, it seems like, arriving, if not every week, then every month. And so it's great. I'm very happy with where I am right now. So I would say at least another couple years.
Awesome. And have you had a chance to meet Callan Diggs?
He's not there. He's in San Miguel Alonso.
Oh, he's in De Allende. Oh, never mind. I was mistaken. Well, he'll be at the conference. He's been on the show before. He's a really great guy. His book, Reaching the Finish Line, people should check that out. It's also available at Brave New Books. Well, we're coming to break with David Robinson of the Rational Physics Conference. We'll find out what Rational Physics is, and we'll also talk to Lynn Ulbricht on the other side of the break. Stay tuned, guys.
Logos.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
This is what happens when you call the cops. Say what? This is what happens when you call the cops. Come on. This is what happens when you call the cops. You get your rights violated or you all get shot. This is what happens when you call the cops. This is what happens when you call the cops. This is what happens when you call the cops. You get your rights violated or you all get shot.
I'm sick of people being victimized by criminal cops. Psychopathic predators terrorizing neighborhood blocks. Equipped with pepper spray, mace, cuffs, tasers, and glocks. They like serial killers acting out subliminal thoughts. Forget what you taught. These cops have got a license.
And that's Rob Hustle with his song, This Is What Happens When You Call the Cops. And if I'm not mistaken, I could swear, and I'm probably just hearing things, I could swear I heard in the lyrics "criminal cops."
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make any sense because the criminals are separate from the cops, right? Because the cops are the good guys, and then the people, smoking plants and living their lives are the bad guys, right?
Well, of course.
Well, no, actually, now keep in mind, the criminal cops is accurate because remember, the state is predicated on violence. There is no state, there is no government without the threat of force and the use of violence to coerce people into doing things that the people who run the government want them to do against their own free will. And therefore, the state is always antithetical to peace and to society as at large. And so don't forget to check out Rob Hustle at robhustle.com. He's also got a sequel, Good Cops, meant ironically, that you can check out as well. He's working on a music video for that. And we're talking with David Robison of the Rational Physics Conference. And we'll get into what rational physics is here shortly. But we also have on the line Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht. And speaking of what happens when you call the cops, of course, Ross Ulbricht is the alleged Dread Pirate Roberts, who was convicted on several counts and given a life sentence. And we are trying in earnest to appeal that decision. And we'll talk to Lynn about maybe what some of the progress is on that. But Lynn, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks.
Well, Lynn, I know. Thank you for coming on. I know you're exhausted. You have, a ton of stuff on your plate, and then you're juggling like 12 different plates. So we really appreciate you sharing time with us.
Sure.
I wanted to get into real quick why David is graciously donating the proceeds of the Rational Physics Conference to Ross's appeals fund. But real quick, I guess, do you have any updates for us on the appeal as it's happening and on how Ross is doing?
Let me just say, first of all, Danny told me what David was doing the other day, and I'm just so blown away and grateful to him for that. We are quite pretty up against it with money. We just received a bill for over $13,000 just to print and assemble and submit the physical appeal to the judges. Can you believe that? It's over $13,000.
Wait, you mean to give them papers, to mail them papers, basically?
Well, they create little books or big books for them. I mean, one cover for one book is $135.
Oh my God!
It's just, who is printing that? It's reality that's unbelievable. So we're going to start. We haven't done it. We're about to launch a crowdfunding effort just for that bill, because really, this is punitive to people who are pursuing justice in this country. It's like, how do you do that? Unless you have millions and millions.
Well, yeah, it's a barrier. It's a barrier to entry. It hurts the poor or the middle class. Yeah, right. Anyone who's not uber rich. It's very difficult to afford. I guess making a book that could easily cost $5 or less to send to the Godmen judges. But I'm sorry to hear that.
A little more than that, but it certainly wouldn't be 3 for $13,000.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be 3 for $13,000. No, definitely not.
And we also have other expenses like legal fees and all of that. That it's pretty daunting, frankly. And so those efforts like David is making is so appreciated. And one family can't do this, but if we all help a little who care about this, then we can do it.
Well, one family can do it. It's the family of blood relatives and friends and supporters of Ross Ulbricht, and that family's pretty big. And that family has already done a lot to try to help Ross, and we're trying to do more for sure.
Yeah, we had another guy that
you guys. I mean, you guys have been great.
Well, there's another guy that I was just talking to the other day about some Bitcoin keychains, and I told him that I was going to take them down there, and I was going to sell them for more than he was selling them to me. And use those proceeds for free Ross. And he said, no, just take them all. And so he donated all these. And it's called
nice.
It is bekeychain.com. A guy named Rob Mitchell.
Write him a thank you, too.
Yeah, his name's Rob Mitchell. He does
I really want to let people know how grateful we are and Ross is, because we really couldn't do it without this kind of support, honestly.
Right.
Bekeychain?
Yeah, Bekeychain. He does a podcast on Let's Talk Bitcoin called The Bitcoin Game. You probably actually met him here at the Texas Bitcoin Conference last year or so.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyway, as far as the appeal's been filed. It was filed January 12th. And pretty much what happens next is the government can respond, and that can take up to 3 months. And then what happens is the defense gets to respond to them. And then I'm not sure exactly what happens after that. The judges, I'm not sure when they're assigned and what the schedule is, but it can take a year or more.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did we have David say why?
No, and I was going to get to that. I just wanted her to give us a quick update. Well, yeah, David, thanks for that update, Lynn. Why did you choose of all causes to donate the proceeds for the Rational Physics Conference to the Free Ross Fund?
Well, I think first and foremost, as you sort of indicated earlier, the fact that he's a libertarian that believes in the non-aggression principle, the fact that we have such a fringe view, even though it's the only consistent view, means that we have to support each other when the state attacks and lock arms and try to defend each other if we're going to have a real chance at expanding freedom. And so that's probably the main reason. And of course, on top of all that, it is the nexus of so many evils of the state, whether it's the kangaroo court system, the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex. It's difficult to really comprehend how evil it is until you look at one individual case. When you look at Ross's case, it's such an incredible travesty of justice that it really puts a human face on it. So I just think not only for Ross, but for freedom in general, it's really important that we continue to fight this. And my contribution is really small. I mean, I could probably do a lot more. And on top of all that, I've watched all of Lynn's interviews and speeches, and I really respect, I can't imagine what she's going through. So it's just, it's all those things together.
Well, we'll have the swag table set up there at Anarchapulco where we're going to be podcasting from. So if you want to put some physical tickets out on the table to try to boost attendance to this conference, let's do that.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And Danny will be giving away a dinner date one night with him in Anarchapulco to the highest bidder. So,
when you were, be careful what you're saying, because
that's worth a lot.
when you weren't here, actually, I think some of the stuff I edited in to the last podcast said that you were going to be buying everybody a beer. So,
oh man, well, it's Mexico. The beer's pretty cheap. I'm sure I can afford it. Well, David, no matter how much you end up raising rather for the Free Ross Fund, every little bit helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, even if you raised $1 million, you may only pay for a couple pages in one of those books. It sounds like those gold-plated books, I guess. But also it's the thought that counts and the awareness too. And you said
just the support.
Yeah,
it
just
really
just the moral
I
support.
couldn't hear a word he said, unfortunately. So, David, I couldn't hear you, but maybe I'll be able to hear it when I download this podcast. But
well,
I am very grateful.
Well, let me actually tell you
when I see him next week.
Oh yeah, are you going to be at the conference?
Pardon me?
Are you going to be at the Anarchapulco conference?
No,
I'm actually speaking at Liberty Forum in New Hampshire at the same time.
Oh, I see.
And then the week after that, at the International Students for Liberty Conference.
That's awesome.
In Washington, D.C. Yeah.
You go, Lynn.
I'm very excited about both. And but have fun down there on the beach.
Oh yeah.
Well, and I just want to add too, Lynn, basically what he said is something that, and I was about to comment on it anyway, is something that you've said, that the case isn't just about Ross, it's about all of us. And he mentioned how Ross's case in particular is just at the center of all sorts of problems having to do with state overreach. The drug war, kangaroo courts is the term he used, and that's a very apt term. I mean, I think anyone who examines the case, and certainly the judge's decision, would recognize that it was a kangaroo court. So
look at if you can read the appeal, or even excerpt or summary of the appeal, it's all about that. It's really protecting all of us, not just Ross, because of the.
Burglars are breaking into hotel rooms by effortlessly and silently opening those key card locks. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll be back to tell you how the hackers do it and what it means for you, the traveler, in a moment.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
When Janet Wolf returned to her room at the Hyatt in Houston and found her laptop stolen, there was no sign of forced entry, and the housekeeper was ruled out as a suspect. So who done it? A hacker, it turns out, using a digital tool that spoofs the computerized key card locks in place at 4 million hotel rooms. After break-ins across Texas, the lock company, Onity, offered a pretty lame solution, plugging the locks with putty. The real solution requires replacing every lock circuit board, something Onity wants the hotels to pay for. But what if they don't? Well, it may be time to stay somewhere else. Motel 6, anyone? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time, take back the power. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time, take back the power. What you gonna do when they show up in black suits on your street and army boots and then silence you? What you gonna say when they strip your rights away and the tax man makes you pay for every bit of sweat you bet today? We don't need to run and hide. We won't be pushed off to the side. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Crypto Show here on this lovely February 7th, 2016. A Sunday here on Logos Radio Network. Don't forget to go to logosradionetwork.com for their annual fundraiser. Some cool prizes are available. Don't forget to go to thecryptoshow.com/free Ross to donate to the Ross Ulbricht Appeals Fund, which we're talking about with his mom and with our guest David Robinson of the Rational Physics Conference. And don't forget our sponsors, Brave New Books and Hill Country Home Improvements. And we're back. I kind of stopped looking at the clock and let us run out onto that break. My bad. I'm usually pretty good about that. And we also fixed the fact, I believe, that Lynn was unable to hear David. We should all be able to hear each other now. But we were just talking about how the proceeds of the Rational Physics Conference are going to the Free Ross Fund. And the reason for that in David's mind was because this case just is so important and transcends so many political concerns that we all have or should have in modern day America. And I couldn't agree more. Now, Lynn, we were talking about the appeal, and you said it could take up to a year yet. How has Ross been doing? Have you been able to visit him recently?
Yeah, let me just say about what David's doing. It's so perfect because Ross got his master's in material science, which includes physics. He's reading a book on physics right now at the prison. He's totally interested in that, so it's really perfect.
Wasn't he teaching? He was teaching a physics class too, wasn't he?
He was tutoring people in physics. There's not enough people in there. Well, no, wait. I think it might have been a little class. You're right. It was a little class. And then he also has done several GED classes and helped people get into college from there. And, there's been several different things he's done like that. He's doing okay. I see him. I saw him last week. I see him this week. I always make sure he has someone to visit him if I can't or his dad can't. And, he's doing okay. But I have to say it's tough. And he's such a buoyant, happy guy. And, I don't know. I just feel like it's taking its toll. I do. But at the same time, he's still himself and he's still, wonderful and everything. I just think it's very hard day after day for 2.5 years now. And it's pretty boring, too. I think it's just boring and claustrophobic. And, it's awful, really, to think about. But he's doing better than I can imagine anybody doing. I mean, he really is. He's taking it day by day. He said, he's cranked up the exercise bike to maximum. So each pedal takes all his exertion, and he just concentrates on the next pedal and the next pedal and not on getting through with it. And he said he's doing the exact same thing being there. He just takes it one day and the next day and not think about, the future too much. And, he said, before you know it, the hours go by, the days go by, the months and the years go by. And that so upset me. I'm like, oh, my gosh, she's talking about years going by at this point. And so that's it's a mix, but he's hanging in there and being, a real contributor to the people there. As regards the appeal, this appeal is a powerful document. It's very long, but there are summaries up. And in the appeal itself, in that article, Brian Dougherty of Reason wrote a very good one. And this is a protection of all of our rights. If trials aren't fair, we're all in peril. This is just a pillar of our liberty to have fair trials. And if you read this appeal, and they said it was twice as long as the average appeal, and they still couldn't put everything in. They had more things, but they couldn't because of constraints of space. They had to get special permission to submit one this long. And it's just, I don't know, kind of sobering how many things happened in that trial that were so unfair.
Well, I know is obviously kind of objectively demonstrated by the length of the appeal. I mean, just in the conversations we've had with you, and then, of course, our own research and conversations we've had with people relevant to the topic, there were just so many grounds for appeal. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it, did a Guinness Book of World Records, kind of thing on longest appeal or longest book. So I'm glad that they give you an extension, because I think it's important to get as much of that in there to those judges deciding the appeal as possible. Well, and is the appeal going to be available to the public at all?
It is. It is available. There's a link on our website under documents. It's up there. And also the amicus brief that's filed. Hopefully we'll have more, but that's filed. That's excellent. It's about the Fourth Amendment violations in the investigation, written by the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. 2 lawyers wrote it. It's really good. And that's up on our documents page on Free Ross also.
Okay, excellent. And check that out, guys. We'll probably check that ourselves and bring that up in a subsequent show. Maybe have Lynn back on even to talk about it. Well, we've got about 3.5 minutes till the end of the segment, and we're going to probably finish that out with Lynn. But I had a couple of quick things, too, before we finish out, Lynn. One is, I don't know if we've even talked about this. What would happen to Ross? Let's say, God forbid, and I just can't imagine this happening, worst case scenario, the appeal doesn't do what we hope it'll do. If the federal government were to end the war on drugs, would there be any possibility of reversing the decision on Ross because of that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sure. I know what you're talking about. I really don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I haven't asked that question. I'm not really, if that happened, it would be an awfully long time, I think. As far as this particular appeal with the 3 judges in the Second Circuit, if it doesn't go the way we want, we can take it to the next level if they'll accept it, which is called en banc, which is all 12 judges in the Second Circuit. And then if that doesn't work out, you can go to the Supreme Court if they'll accept it. I've talked to a lawyer friend of mine who won at the first level. The government appealed that. They appealed, went to the second level. He lost. Then he went to the Supreme Court and won.
That's sometimes how it goes, right? And
and I don't know how I'm going to pay for that. I mean, I'm just praying that doesn't happen.
I'm praying it doesn't happen too. I'm praying this appeal should be sufficient. And if the judges
I think it should too.
Yeah, we're running out of ghost gunners.
Exactly. The government's going to prohibit those by the time we need to sell enough of them to raise the funds. Of course, hopefully what's that?
Go ahead. I was going to say another neat thing that we hope happens soon is that we can people can contribute to Ross tax deductible. And I think that'll really help.
That should really help.
Or we can get somebody like McAfee in there who's promised to pardon him.
Yeah, if he becomes president. Heck yeah. I'd vote for McAfee just for that. If he would,
just for that.
If he would look at our choices.
Might as well, right? Yeah.
I'm tired of writing in SpongeBob.
I'm writing the second best cartoon, McAfee. Well, we've got about a minute left. Lynn, I think you had also mentioned off air about a new website or something like that.
Yeah, that's one reason I said I was tired. What I've been doing is writing content for the whole case and all the different aspects of it. And I'll tell you, it's just like, oh my gosh. But anyway, yes, we're going to launch a new website hopefully soon. And it's going to have home movies of Ross and talking and interacting, which I think will really help people understand him better. And just some neat things in it that are new. And I think it's going to be a better site overall. We're going to have an actual store with a shopping cart and, stuff like that.
Awesome.
So,
and what will the website be? Is it already functional or
it'll
no?
be the same. What?
So freeross.org?
Yeah, it'll still be that. Uh-huh.
Oh, so you're just upgrading that, I see. Well, we're coming to break. Lynn Ulbricht, mother of Ross Ulbricht.
No, it's yeah. Okay.
Lynn, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
World's number one mom, Lynn Ulbricht. We'll be right back here on the
Easy.
Welcome back, guys, to the Crypto Show here on this lovely February 7th, 2016, a Sunday here on Logos Radio Network. Don't forget the fundraiser at logosradionetwork.com. You can still go to thecryptoshow.com/freeross and either donate directly to the Appeals Fund or buy some cool stuff, the proceeds of which go to the Ross Ulbricht Appeals Fund. Don't forget our sponsors, Brave New Books and Hill Country Home Improvements. And don't forget Lynn Ulbricht, the world's number one mom. I just picture a mug with that stylized font of world's number one mom and like a heart, maybe Lynn's picture on the other side. That would be her mug shot, I guess. No, that was a bad joke. But check out freeross.org, not just for more information to help, but as she was mentioning, she's upgrading it to include some cool stuff, including home videos of Ross, which I meant to mention to her before she went off. She should send those to the judges, so the judges remember that Ross is a human being who at one time was innocent and is still innocent, by the way, but maybe seeing him as an innocent little boy would make them realize that they should acquit this guy and throw out his conviction, throw out his sentence, and free the man, because it's just an awful crime to put him in jail. Criminal cops, rather, indeed. Not criminal crops. No such thing. Criminal cops, as Rob Hustle said.
Well, the cops are the criminal crops.
That's true. But we're always happy to have her on, and check out the appeal at freeross.org. And of course, we're also talking with David Robinson of the Rational Physics Conference. David, sorry, I kind of steamrolled over you there with Lynn. I should have given you an opportunity to speak. I was still kind of operating on the assumption that she couldn't hear you in the back of my mind, I think. So I apologize for that. I'm glad you got to talk to her off air. But, I think obviously she really appreciates what you're doing by donating the proceeds of that conference. So we just thank you so much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's the least I could do, and it was good to talk to her off the air there for a second. I hope to meet her one day.
Yeah, when we've had the great pleasure to have met her since they're from Austin, and that's where we are. But I definitely hope you get to meet her in person too.
Yeah, she gets you into some pretty cool places sometimes.
Wait, what is that a reference to? I don't remember.
Remember I was on the red carpet.
Oh, you got to go to the Deep Web movie premiere. That's so selfish. You go without me, just like you went to Narcopulco without me. Well, we're going to get to meet David in Narcopulco here in the next week and a half or so, so we're excited about that. But David, with
1 week for me.
1 week for you're going early. With no further ado, let's dig into rational physics. Now, I guess before you quite explain rational physics, tell us your journey into rational physics.
Sure. Yeah. It probably started about 2010, I think it was. And I've always been interested in physics. Growing up, I read Brief History of Time, Elegant Universe, all the popularized physics novels. And I loved it. It's like the best science fiction you can imagine, because it's really weird and crazy, but it's supposed to be actual science. So it's mind blowing. But I was really annoyed by the fact that I never could really understand any of it. And over the years through college, I was always researching it periodically, trying to figure it out. And eventually I found an article on LouRockwell.com. You guys know LouRockwell.com, right?
Oh, yeah. I love LouRockwell.com.
For sure. And it was Electric Universe. And I was really impressed with that. And that was the first time that I was able to start questioning physics, because physics is one subject that you think, well, the scientists have to have this one right, because they've been so well tested for 100 years. And this is the one they can't possibly screw up. So it was part of it was just getting past the mental block of being able to question it. And I liked Electric Universe for a while, but then I started having issues with that too. I thought there were some similar issues with the mainstream that they were having. I couldn't fully grasp it. And so one day I actually searched a priori physics, because I was really into Austrian economics at the time. And I just randomly Googled it and see what's going to come up. And somehow, eventually, that led me to Bill Gates' website, which has a pretty interesting look to it. It looks like it was made in 1995. And it's like, I don't know if you guys seen the Time Cube website. I felt like I was about to read another Time Cube website just by the looks of it.
Time Cube?
Yeah, it's this really weird website that's just a big, long rant. It's kind of a viral meme on the internet. But I started reading the content of Gates' website, and I couldn't believe it. I thought this was incredible. He has really good arguments against the mainstream. He has his own theory called thread theory. And so from there, I joined a Facebook group, or a series of Facebook groups of people that were also interested. And so it's been probably 5 years of just arguing with these people and discussing and reading Gates' book and really getting into this, that I've completely changed my positions, and I'd say I'm a proponent of thread theory at this point.
Well, that's pretty incredible. Yeah, I just want to say that, the history of science and academic fields is one of, paradigm shifts and completely overturning previous, modes of thinking and whatever within the field. So, it's so surprising how resistant people are to new ideas. And of course, something you mentioned on the Rational Physics Conference website, and just a little blurb about your talk is, there's a lot of corruption and bias and personal incentive that goes on in science that people forget about. Like, people think that scientists in particular, like physicists, that they're just these like sort of godmen, or holy priests who can do no wrong and are only out for knowledge, but with government influence and corporate money, it's easy for that to be compromised. So it really should come as no shock that there could be some deep rot in mainstream physics or science at large. And you can see that in other areas like economics. You can definitely see that in medicine, with maybe more controversial things like vaccines, but less controversial things like the low-fat diet, which was so popular for so long. But anyway, I just thought that was an important kind of context to put it in. Well, so let's get into it then. You talk about thread theory. We'll get into that, but I guess before you do it, and you already kind of mentioned what rational physics is about, as I alluded to earlier, that it's a priori physics. Now, when you say a priori physics, is it the same as, say, praxeology, where you have sort of axioms and through correct logic you deduce theorems, or is it a little subtly different from that? Or I guess get into it a little bit more.
Sure, it's a little different because it's not axiomatic, but it is based on assumptions, and so there's no doubt that evidence is going to influence the theory that you formulate. But the point of it is that when it comes time to present the theory, you don't have to mention a single shred of evidence. The definitions are critically reasoned. And I guess the overall point would be that when we talk about, and I should say that rational physics is not about prediction. And I think that it's been really drilled into people's heads that physics is about prediction equations. The equations are not in dispute at all. I think they can make very, very accurate predictions. The problem is with the physical interpretations. When you talk about existence, you're necessarily making assumptions because we're talking about whatever existed prior to the evolution of human life. There's something out there, and we can never really know, especially at the fundamental levels of reality, what's happening. We have to make assumptions in order to try to explain the evidence. Those assumptions are just statements that you take at face value for the purpose of understanding a theory. So it's a priori in the sense that you begin with your assumptions. You say, let us assume that this is what exists, and let us assume that this is its behavior, and let us assume that these are the definitions for our key terms. And at that point, you can make a judgment about the theory, about whether or not it's rational, whether or not the objects can be illustrated, whether or not the behavior can be shown in a movie, and so on. And then it's only after all that you can even begin to approach these ideas like truth, belief, knowledge, fact. Those are extra scientific concepts that you have to have a coherent, intelligible theory first before you can even start considering how well it explains the evidence and so on.
Okay, and so like you said, it's not necessarily that mainstream physics is wrong as far as the predictive nature of equations they put out, but maybe the equations aren't as descriptive as they like to consider them, or perhaps the physicist's interpretations of what the math says can be incorrect. Is that right? Or
yeah, that's exactly it. The one famous example is Newton with his law of gravitation. When he published that, which is his equation for gravity, he reiterated multiple times that he had no physical explanation or mechanism for gravity. Yet through empiricism, he was able to discover an equation, which is really just an advanced form of pattern recognition. And he was able to discover a pattern and encode it into an equation, and he's able to make predictions from that. But I guess the overall point is that that doesn't necessitate that you have an understanding of the underlying mechanism. And equations are purely quantitative. Every variable in every equation is just a measured quantity. And quantities themselves have to be interpreted qualitatively in order to understand them in a physical context. So they can make predictions because of empiricism, but the problem is that the physical interpretations are irrational.
And that really does make total sense because, when you think about, say, if you read like The Brief History of Time or a popular like book on relativity and quantum mechanics, of course they are basing a lot of what they're talking about on the math in physical experiments or whatever. But as you said, they're giving you a qualitative analysis or description of what's going on based on what the math in the experiments are telling us. So it is a different thing. Just like with gravity, you look at his Newtonian equation for gravity, it doesn't tell you anything about how gravity works in the real world per se. But we'll talk more about that with David Robison of the Rational Physics Conference here on The Crypto Show on the other side of the break, so stay tuned.
Trust it.
can't be trusted. Physics. Welcome back to the Crypto Show, guys, here on this lovely February 7th, 2016, a Sunday here on Logos Radio Network, brought to you as always by our sponsors, Hill Country Home Improvements, Brave New Books, and freeross.org. So check that out. Donate to the Ross Ulbricht Appeals Fund. Please save an innocent man, or help to save an innocent man. It's more than just his life at stake. It's all of us. We're talking with David Robinson about rational physics and the Rational Physics Conference. And I just want to comment, and feel free to, respond or correct me if I'm wrong. But, like you make a great point with like Newtonian physics with Newton and his laws of gravity. What preceded his formulation of the mathematics of gravity and even the concept of mutual attraction of anything that has mass is simply observing and describing either in his head or on paper what he was seeing and then hypothesizing about why that might be the case. So already before he's coming up with this idea of the mutual attraction of gravity, he's doing very basic sort of just kind of logical observational things on it. And if you think about it, like when you hit a cue ball at a billiard ball and it makes contact, you can pretty easily describe and explain the impact of one causing the other to move. And of course, that gets into the whole issue of the weakness of inductive reasoning and the Scottish philosopher David Hume, and how all science is ultimately flawed in the sense that inductive reasoning is there's no ultimate proof for sort of cause and effect. But anyway, with a billiard ball, you can kind of say, well, that one billiard ball hit the other and it went. But with like gravity, there's no like direct evidence that mass attracts each other. It just so happens that if you model the force of gravity based on that mathematically, it becomes an accurate model for predicting things. But that's it. It doesn't tell you the underlying mechanism. Is that at all correct? Or
yeah, I'd say that's a really accurate description. I mean, it always goes back to the difference between prediction and explanation, and they conflate prediction and explanation constantly. And what ends up happening is they think that their assumptions about reality are facts. When they talk about zero-dimensional particles, warp space, time, fields, force, charge, all of these abstract mathematical concepts, they end up regarding as facts. But there's a total difference between recognizing a pattern in nature that you observe and encoding it into an equation, and on the other hand, making assumptions about what actually exists and what its behavior is that causes these observed patterns.
Yeah, like, for instance, like it's one thing to observe, say gravity and then try to write math about it. But with modern physics, and I don't pretend to know, a lot about it other than, the sort of pop stuff I've read, but, you still get some of the basic concepts without understanding the math. But instead of describing reality with math, they'll start to create reality out of the math they use. And they'll even admit that doesn't necessarily, that the math doesn't always have to conform to reality, but they'll sometimes give it reality anyway. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that is the main problem with their physical interpretations. It's actually called the fallacy of reification. It's also known as the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And it's where you treat a concept as if it's an object. So in the case of modern physics, they're always treating abstract mathematical concepts as if they're objects with shape. And they don't actually use objects. We get the impression that they are because they show animations, they draw images on the chalkboard during the physics lecture. There's images all throughout the textbooks and everything. So we get the impression, oh, this is an object that has some kind of shape and form, and so I can understand what that is. But none of those drawings can be taken literally because they're all acts of reification. They're treating abstract math concepts as if they're objects. And one of the examples I brought up in the Anarchast was the field. And if you look for a definition of a field, all it is how quantities vary, measured quantities vary with respect to location and time. And if you're measuring around a magnet, you get different numbers, or you get numbers at each location. So the field is really just a list of the numbers. It's a description of what you observed. But then later on in their presentation, they'll say things like, oh, the field had a vibration. And they'll illustrate this object with shape that's vibrating. Well, wait a minute. You originally defined it as a list of numbers. It's a description of what you observed. It's not a standalone object all its own that can influence other objects and perform activities. But later on in the presentation, they surreptitiously convert it through the fallacy of reification into an object, and they illustrate it as something that's vibrating. But then when you ask the question, is that what a field actually is, this object with shape? No, you can't take that literally. Well, then what does it mean to say an abstract concept is vibrating or has an excitation? Every statement ends up being irrational. And this is why, whether it be zero-dimensional particles, warp space-time, any of their alleged objects, they're always illustrating them, and we all think they're talking about objects. But ultimately, once you take all that away, you can't visualize or conceptualize what they're talking about. So it's impossible to understand their explanations.
Well, and let me ask you this too. I think that all of what you're saying is so key, because I've been, and I'm not a scientist, but you don't have to be a scientist to understand actually flaws in science in general, because if the philosophy of science and the methodology of science is wrong, then likely a lot of actual science is going to be wrong. And you don't even necessarily have to be well versed in a lot of the technical stuff to just be able to discern that, as we're kind of doing, just logically. But let me ask you this. So they sort of will create objects that don't necessarily exist out of the math. Now, in theory, let's just say these objects could exist. It's just we haven't been able to test them or observe them, and they also happen to be predicted to exist by the math. But if, like with, say, the God particle, the Higgs boson that they supposedly found at CERN, if they claim to be able to have tested for the existence of it, are they really doing that, even though prior to that it was just an artifact of the math? I mean, do you think stuff like that is still valid, according to rational physics? Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So this is a sort of a line of reasoning that I think people often make. In fact, if you watch any documentary on quantum mechanics, especially, they always started out with this spiel about, look, at the quantum scale, things are really weird and crazy, and Mother Nature isn't necessarily going to behave and exist in ways that us stupid primates can really understand. And I concede the point, and I agree that the human mind cannot place a limit on what is possible in nature. But my issue is that if it really is the case that Mother Nature is incomprehensible to us, then how does it help relieve our ignorance to try to fill that void with theories that are also incomprehensible to us? So you mentioned the Higgs boson. Well, the Higgs boson is an elementary particle. The Standard Model has 17 elementary particles. If you include the antiparticles and the colors for the different quarks, it goes up to 61 particles. And all of those elementary particles are conceived to be zero-dimensional, meaning they have no size and they have no shape. So what could that possibly mean? It's impossible for the human mind to actually rationalize and understand what those words refer to. And when they say the word particle, you get the impression they're talking about a little bead of matter. And so you think maybe there's something there, but it's actually a contradiction. What actually is, so prior to the evidence, prior to any truth consideration or consideration of belief, truth, proof, the theory itself has to be rational. It has to be rationalizable. You have to be able to understand it before you can even say, is there evidence for it? Is this true? Is this false? And the problem with the Higgs boson is that it's a zero-dimensional particle. And what does that actually mean? Nobody can explain what that means. So what does it add to our understanding? And same thing with the Higgs field. It's an abstract concept. They haven't explained what the field is actually supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the key that you keep saying is it's devoid of meaning. And, it seems like, well, of course, if the math can predict things, great. But if it has no real meaning, I feel like we're still not doing real science, because there's, the whole point is so it can be comprehensible to a human being. And, it's interesting, too. I read a book once called Not Even Wrong by a guy named Peter Voigt. He's a Ivy League trained mathematician and physicist. And a lot of the book was, some of the book was technical. A lot of it I got just the gist of. A lot of it was over my head as far as being specifically technical. But a lot of the book was accessible to a layman. And he basically criticizes all of particle physics, in particular string theory, as being bunk science. And he doesn't necessarily go the rational physics route, but even outside of the criticism that rational physics brings, there are very intelligent, qualified experts who are very critical of mainstream physics. And I don't think people are even aware of that.
Yeah, I think I've heard of his name before. I have not read that book, but I should pick that up. But you mentioned particle physics. It's funny because, well, string theory especially, and string theory, they're talking about, whereas in the Standard Model, they got zero-dimensional particles, and string theory, they got one-dimensional strings. Well, what's a one-dimensional string? How does it not thin out into nothing? How can you have something that's one-dimensional? But particle physics, to my knowledge, and looking at the examples of particle accelerators and colliders that have been built around the world, I've yet to find one example of a particle collider that was not government funded in its entirety. So it seems like it's a government subsidized. You could call it a religion if you wanted to say, but it's government subsidized, and it's not surprising why there's been an explosion in the number of particles. Every time they quote unquote discover a particle, they get a Nobel Prize. And the LHC at the time of the discovery, of the Higgs boson, that operating cost plus construction cost totaled $13.25 billion in public money. And part of the reason for that they justified in 1994 for building that gigantic, crazy technological machine was that they wanted to find a source of mass. So it's like you're telling the public, give us all this money, and then they, it takes 10 years to build it and billions of dollars. There's so much pressure on you to find this particle. And that's where I don't think it's a conspiracy, but that's where confirmation bias enters the picture. In fact, the data that comes out of that detector is so voluminous that they dump 99.99997% of it. And they do so by running it through a giant server farm on site. It's actually multi-tiered, and there's off-site locations too. And it runs millions of lines of code from physicists and virtually eliminates all the data. So what is coded into those lines of code? What preconceived ideas and assumptions are in there? And how do they arrive? They say they only keep what's, quote, interesting, and they filter out the background, and it's too voluminous. There's so much room here for confirmation bias and data dredging, and it's ridiculous.
That's a value judgment there to say what's interesting. I mean, that's a really good point. It reminds me of the East Anglia affair in climate change, where the code had a lot of issues. We're coming to break with David Robinson. We'll be right back.
There's now.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
For the longest time, for the longest, if you said that Bitcoin was my life, I would tell you,
show enough, show you right.
What else can I do? I'm so inspired by you, and I'm just holding for the longest time. Once I knew my stocks and bonds were gone, I knew Satoshi Nakamoto was the one to come and save me. Encrypted money, bravery, and I'm just holding for the longest time. For the longest time. For the longest, don't panic, the price.
Welcome back to the Crypto Show, guys. We're talking with David Robinson of the Rational Physics Conference about rational physics. And we're going to have another guest with us. He's kind of hanging here with us, and we'll talk a little bit about some Bitcoin-related stuff towards the end of the show. And we'll introduce him in a little bit. We're talking about the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, and he brought up a really good point. There's multiple layers to science as far as like not simply the scientific method and whether that's done properly, but when we use science, we use it as sort of a shorthand for the scientific method, the application of the scientific method, the results of the application of the scientific method, and everything kind of after that and in between, the data, the interpretation of the data, and then formulation of new theories and stuff. Obviously, it's an ongoing dynamic, but there are basically various places where it can fail. And as David brought up with CERN, it's not simply that, hey, they collide some subatomic particles and the result is some energy in some new subatomic particles, and voila. They have all this data that they have to sift through, and inherent in data, in an algorithm or a model or any kind of code that would be looking through that data, there's going to be some form of bias. There's going to be potentially there's going to be some human who is making value judgments when determining what the computer does or does not consider. And then, of course, even beyond that, the humans will specifically make judgments about that too. And so that's huge because as I mentioned, East Anglia, the whole ClimateGate thing, it was discovered that the East Anglia University in the United Kingdom, where a huge portion of climate science comes from, that they were fudging data. They were intentionally lying to the public. Their computer models were examined by software engineers outside of climate science and found to have had all sorts of problems with it. So if that's flawed too, no matter how perfect, how well constructed and operating the LHC itself might be, that could throw things off too. Is that right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's so many layers to it, like you said. Even if we get rid of the government funding and the corporate funding, corporations connected to the government funding, at the very base level, I think you mentioned earlier, scientists are just humans. They want their work to remain relevant. And when you have a system like peer review, which allegedly is ostensibly designed to keep bad science out and only keep good science in, I think it accomplishes the exact opposite. People in positions of power and the prestigious journals are going to reject things that don't agree with their theories, their theories. And so it's a mechanism by which bad stupid theories become entrenched for long periods of time that don't make any sense. There's no real open discussion. There's no real allowance for dissent. It's a mechanism of control. And then, of course, you have layers on top of that, getting the government money, getting the government grants, getting the corporate connected to the government funding and all that. So and just outright bribery and fraud. I don't know if you've ever seen a website like retractionwatch.org where they track retractions from major journals, and it's fraud this, fraud that, manipulation this, manipulation that. There's, I think, a great deal more corruption than most people are aware of, and science has in many ways become a label that is used to propagandize certain ideas.
Amen. It's a label used to propagandize ideas and to cover up corruption. Like, you can't question science, quote unquote, or you're an idiot or you're crazy, when in reality, and then they'll conflate, well, you're questioning the scientific method and the validity of scientific knowledge. Well,
Bill Nye,
exactly. Well, you can't question the validity of scientific, quote unquote, knowledge if the method is being applied wrong, if there's bias, if there's corruption. That's the whole point of science. Is openness, transparency, reproducibility in experiments, and skepticism. And it's crazy that you can't be skeptical of vaccines. You can't be skeptical of climate science. You can't even be skeptical of mainstream physics, or you're an idiot. And the fact that that's the attitude shows you that there is a lack of science in science.
Well, based on those qualifications, would you say that social science is a real science? How can you test? How can you reproduce? How can you?
It's science in a different way. It's not necessarily.
Have you not been on Facebook? Is that not social science?
I mean, that's a great question. Right.
Well, Richard Feynman didn't. I saw this. Sorry to interject.
Yeah,
Richard Feynman. I saw this interview with him before he died, and he was arguing against social science. He's like, I don't understand it. It's not a real science. He's like, I may be proven wrong in the next 50 years, but as far as it is now, they have yet to show any of these things that real science has.
Right.
There's no test. There's no proof. There's no axioms. There's no rigorous peer review.
And I think that's true to some extent. So just I would say on that topic is like with economics, Mises basically took economics and put it on this footing of praxeology, human action and deductive reasoning and axioms based on that. And and I'm not just taking his word for it, I think he's just right. He basically took all of social science as being sort of separate branches of the same overall science of economics or human action. And I tend to agree with that. And it's not so much that it's not science to the extent that it can be a scientific discipline. It's a different type of science. In other words, regular science is experimental and inductive, whereas social science, to the extent that we can determine anything using it, it would be more axiomatic and deductive logical reasoning versus. So it's different. So it isn't science in a way, but it is. It's just a different kind of science.
Maybe science isn't the right word.
And perhaps we should use a different word for it. Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
What do you think, David? Just on that topic, real quick.
Yeah, I think it depends on your goal. If you're talking natural sciences or the physical sciences, if your goal is to predict, then the empirical scientific method is very useful. If your goal is to explain, then you're necessarily invoking and talking about observer independent reality. And so you have no choice but to make assumptions. And within that framework, you can either make assumptions whose key terms can be used consistently or assumptions which can. And so no matter what we're making assumptions, we have to conform to our own human ability to reason. And so I think it's closer to this point of view is closer to what Austrian economics does, which is to make assumptions and to critically reason the definitions, critically reason the theory. And it's just that, a theory. But yeah, I guess that's my overall point.
Yeah, and I like that. I just to add to that too, Mises talks about how, and again, I'm not invoking some sort of authority. I want to make that clear, but I just agree. If you read like human action and stuff, like in other parts where he talks about like the philosophy of science, I think he's just spot on. But he talks about how, contrary to the common perception that you have to formulate theories based on facts always, it's actually with complex phenomena like social sciences or economics, appropriate and valid, or probably exclusively valid, to formulate your theory to a large extent before you examine the facts. And in fact, you almost can't avoid in any kind of science formulating a theory before examining the facts, because obviously you form a hypothesis based on some observation, but then you observe more and test more. So I think it's like you said, Jonathan, or I'm sorry, William. I think it's William. It's a different kind of thing. It probably should be called something else. But
it's Yamamushi.
Yamamushi. Yeah, I saw John Bush walk in, and it's one of those things where John Bush walks in and you think of him and you call someone a different name. You ruin everything, John Bush.
I know people mistake us all the time.
But anyway, let's get back. We got 30 seconds left. I want to ask you more about thread theory, which you brought up in the rope hypothesis, because that's a big part, as I understand, of rational physics, and we haven't even really touched on that. So we're talking with David Robinson of the Rational Physics Conference, here on the Crypto Show, and we'll talk also about the upcoming conference when we return in the next couple of segments. So stay tuned. We'll be right back, guys.
The world's richest woman says in order to get rich, you have to think rich. Okay, but how exactly do you do that? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and when I come back, I'll explain how rich people think differently from everyone else.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
To many wealthy people, such as Gina Reinhart, the world's richest woman, making lots of money is all about cultivating a mindset, a rich mindset. So what is that? Steve Seibold, author of How Rich People Think, says it starts by understanding that money is not the root of all evil, and that building wealth is best done with other people's money. The rich, he writes, are prepared to take risks to get rich. They'd rather be educated than entertained. They focus on earning rather than saving, and they view selfishness not as a vice, but as a virtue. Gordon Gekko, eat your heart out, I think. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
We'll be kidding about chemtrails.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
I've been walking a tightrope between fact and fiction. Been wrestling with demons in small bottle prisons. Been talking to sinners who claim to be Christian. Been shouting at leaders who claim to be listening. And the pendulum swings from the left to the right. Its momentum increases the need for the fight. Like a moment of blindness and a lifetime of sight.
Welcome back, guys, to the Crypto Show here on Logos Radio Network on this lovely February 7th, 2016, a Sunday. Brought to you, as always, by our sponsors, Brave New Books and Hill Country Home Improvements. And don't forget the freeross.org website, thecryptoshow.com/freeross. We're talking with, is it Robinson or Robison?
Robinson. Yeah, Robinson.
Robinson, okay. No.
And there's also another fundraiser. I know we all heard it in the commercial with the little shotgun and everything, but remind everybody about the
Logos Radio Network fundraiser. Still going on. Excellent prizes. The first 25 people to donate $25 get My Magic Mud. And what are the first and second prizes?
It's a skull lower receiver and a Taurus Curve. It's a little cute handgun that I think might be good for a woman, probably. But and then there's some $25 gift cards from All About Vapor.
That's awesome.
If you like vaping.
I don't like those guys, but
yeah, my friend Charlie hooked me up with those
Well, either way, hopefully someone will like them. And vaping, it's a great alternative to smoking. And I know because I used to smoke, and regular cigarettes are awful for you. And I know
so is crack. You should really quit that.
I should. I definitely should. Oh, by the way, Taurus, just real quick. There is a dog training place in town called Taurus that makes no sense as a name. I don't get it. But anyway,
they're bullies.
They're bullies?
They bully your dog into submission.
I thought it was like the shape of the dog.
Maybe. I don't know. But it's just like Taurus means bull. It's like,
right.
why
That's what I
call it
said.
dog
They bully your dog into submission.
Oh, you said bully. That kind of makes sense, actually. Anyway, thanks for explaining that, Denny. We're talking with David Robinson about rational physics. I mean, there's a lot I want to cover. We only have 2 segments, and we also have to talk to our other guest about some Bitcoin-related matters, although we'll probably go over into the podcast portion of the show with that as well. Definitely excited to talk about that. Before we talk about the conference, though, too, because we definitely want to let people know about that, I do want to ask you, why did mainstream physics go so wrong? Was it accidental? Was it on purpose? And can you explain when it might have gone wrong? Or are there any discrete points in time at which it might have done so?
I think the answer is kind of twofold. I think on one hand, atomism has been around since ancient times, and I'm sure well before that. Man has always tried to physically interpret and go, what's really at the base of all this, and what explains this? And apparently the idea of the rope configuration never occurred to anybody, or else they didn't write it down. We've always conceived in terms of particles or ether, and so there's the different phenomena have always been so hard to explain with those assumptions. And I think another part of that was with the growth of mathematics and the development of mathematics after man settled down. It was, I think, only inevitable that math would sort of, because the explanation side was so weak and couldn't really explain. But on the prediction side, there was wild success after success after success, really in a big way, starting with Newton's law of gravitation. So I think mathematics has become, and the view of the mainstream, the language of physics. And I think the confusion, you look at quantum mechanics and everything is supposed to be so confusing and weird. And I think what it all ultimately boils down to is that if you really do live in a universe where matter is interconnected, where every atom is connected to every other atom physically, and you assume that matter is made of particles, everything is going to appear paradoxical and you won't be able to understand it. It's going to be really strange. And so I think that was sort of inevitable because nobody had really thought of this thread theory configuration before. So I think that's really where things have gone wrong.
Yeah, and I want to point out a couple things too. You brought up the ether, and there's some people who actually still subscribe to that theory. I remain agnostic because I just don't know, but I'm definitely open-minded, just like with all this stuff, because as time has gone on, I realize a lot of what we think we know is probably wrong to some degree. But it's ironic that physicists gave up the ether, which they considered this sort of unnecessary, superfluous construct, that, this sort of absolute ether to compare things to, and yet they then committed the same sort of error subsequent to that with all of these mathematical artifacts that had no physical reality. So it's a very ironic situation that we find ourselves in. And, another thing is too, just as to throw this out there for people to maybe look up, and I haven't really investigated this, but on the surface it makes sense. We use the quantitative analysis they use in physics is calculus based, and calculus is infinitely divisible. And what's interesting is that, at least according to quantum mechanics, the world is not infinitely divisible. There is a minimum discrete unit of time, space in matter called a quantum. And so it's interesting that we use a mathematics that is non-discrete, whereas according to physics, the world is discrete into little units. And so who knows, maybe that's another way in which subtle but important errors have cropped up in physics. What do you think of that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just another example of how the mathematics can be very accurate at predicting, but it's such a radically different nature than actually physically explaining. I mean, something has to exist in reality that is responsible for all this. And that to me is really the question. So if your goal is practicality and developing technology and making predictions, then the empirical method is the way to go. But the problem is when it's mixed in with explanation, where you're talking about what exists, what it's actually doing. And so that's the problem.
Yeah, and that really is so key. And, I'm really glad you came on the show, and I watched your podcast with Jeff Berwick because, I certainly never thought of this distinction. I mean, not that I'm particularly important, but I don't think a lot of people have realized this important distinction between predictive ability and actual explanation. And it really makes total sense. And just real quick, I want to add too, as we talked about earlier with Newton and gravity, it was in a sense a fudge to introduce the concept of mutual attraction of matter, because there was no actual evidence per se. It was just useful as a predictive mechanism mathematically. Same with Einstein. Well, Einstein totally overturned that, and now we think instead of mutual attraction, warping of space-time that causes curvature that causes the force of gravity. So again, even Einstein is famous for admitting that was a fudge. In the sense of it was a thought experiment. And again, nothing per se wrong with these things as far as certain predictive things go, but it doesn't necessarily give any real meaningful explanation of it. Well, let's talk about 2.5 minutes till break, till the next segment. Let's talk about the actual conference, and then I have a couple more questions to the other side of the break about some of this stuff. And we actually haven't even gotten to thread theory or explaining that. So we'll do that on the other side of the break. But let's talk about the conference real quick. Tell us some details about that.
Sure. Yeah. So it's on February 22nd, which is the Monday after Anarchapulco ends. Like we said earlier, it's $30. The proceeds go to Free Ross. And there'll be 4 speakers there. You got Bill Gaede, who came up with thread theory and the rational scientific method, as it's called. And he'll be talking about Big Bang and black holes in the context of his thread theory. And then there's Stephen Crothers, who is a speaker at the Electric Universe conferences every year. And he will be live on video conference. And he'll also be talking about Big Bang and black holes, but they come at it from completely different angles. So they'll be criticizing these ideas. And then you have Mike Huttner, who is really big on language and the importance of definitions in science. And this is what's so missing from physics today. They don't care about definitions. Everything we're talking about, they're going to say, this is philosophy. This doesn't matter. This is just physical interpretations. All that matters is the math. Yet, on the same token, they'll turn around and say, warp space-time is a fact, or zero-dimensional particles are a fact. So they want to have their cake and eat it too. So Mike will be talking about the importance of definitions. And then I'll be talking about what is the rational scientific method and how does it compete with the current version of the scientific method, and some criticisms of science, basically, as it's conceived now.
That sounds so exciting. And what's the website again for people to sign up for the conference?
It's you can sign up through anarchapulco.com. So through the main Anarchapulco website, it's a workshop on there.
Awesome. And of course, and then what happens with the money from the proceeds of the conference?
That's all going to the Free Ross campaign.
Darn right it is. And I think that's so awesome. And don't forget that, guys, if you want to learn a cool different take on physics, which, whether you ultimately agree or disagree with everything they have to say, these are really important distinctions that are undeniable that he's bringing up. And so check that out and help Ross in the process. And we'll be right back with David Robinson.
Easy.
Waiting for the winds of change to sweep the clouds away. Waiting for the rainbow's end to cast its gold your way. Countless ways you pass the day.
All right, guys, welcome back to the final segment of the Crypto Show with David Robinson of the Rational Physics Conference. We're going to wrap up with him in this segment and talk some Bitcoin with our other guest. And you can catch a lot of that off air at our podcast portion of the show at thecryptoshow.com. So check that out. Now, David, real quick again, just give the quick details of the conference in case people forgot or just tuning in, and then get into thread theory for us.
Sure. So the conference is on February 22nd. It starts at 10 a.m. So that's the day after Anarchapulco ends. It's a Monday, and it will be held at the Grand Hotel. We don't know exactly where yet. That'll be announced. And it's $30. You can buy the tickets through the Anarchapulco website, and all the proceeds will be going to the Free Ross campaign.
Wow, that sounds magical. We should make a word for it, like science.
Okay.
No, I'm referring to the magic word for Let's Talk Bitcoin will be science.
SCIENCE.
There you go.
In case you don't know. Yeah, we do on Let's Talk Bitcoin Network. We have magic words for people to look for LTB coin. But all right, let's get into thread theory. What is? I keep bringing it up and asking you to get into it, and then I sidetrack us. But what is thread theory, and also what is the rope hypothesis?
Okay, so in the rational scientific method, there's 3 stages: hypothesis, theory, conclusion. And so thread theory starts out with the rope hypothesis. So the rope hypothesis states that every atom, and I'm talking about hydrogen atoms here, every atom in the universe is connected, really actually connected physically to every other atom in the universe by an electromagnetic rope. So each one of these ropes, if I could describe them, if you take a DNA and remove the rungs, the middle of it, so you just have the 2 strands twisted around each other, that's the same shape that these ropes take on. So one of these ropes binds every atom in the universe. So an atom is just a convergence of these ropes. And as each one of these ropes, gazillions, approach a single hydrogen atom, one of the threads breaks off and wraps around and forms the electron, what's called the electron serpentine. And the other thread penetrates to the center to form the proton dandelion. So what that means is the electron in a hydrogen atom is not a little bead that zips around. It would look more like a corrugated ball of yarn woven with gazillions and gazillions of threads from originating in these ropes. And the proton is not a little blob of matter or a zero-dimensional particle. It's a convergence of threads. So it would look like a sea urchin with spines sticking out in all directions. So an atom is like a little cosmic knot in a universe threaded throughout with electromagnetic ropes. And all of the ropes are straight. They're all under tension. Every atom is pumping and vibrating. And so every atom is sending light signals to every other atom. And so under this idea, you have a theory where you're only dealing with 3-dimensional objects. There's no concepts. There's no abstract concepts. Everything can be visualized. So your grandma, your kid, everybody can understand it. You don't have to have faith for anything that you can't understand. Everybody can visualize this.
Don't have faith
Yeah.
Thank you, George Michael.
Yeah. It's a grand unified theory, so it explains electricity, magnetism, gravity, and light. And it has a brand new configuration, which has never, to my knowledge, been thought of before, which is interconnected matter. And it dissolves all of the confusion surrounding quantum mechanics and, things like wave-particle duality or spooky action at a distance. It's easy to explain under theory with interconnected matter.
That's incredible. That's quite a tall order that it seems to fill. And what is the origin of it? Like it sounds sensible in a way, like that all matter is connected.
We are all one.
We are all one. Almost mystical. I mean, not in a bad way. But what is the origin of it? How was this conceived? And was this conceived by Bill Gates specifically?
And does this also explain the Highlander?
Yeah, well, both. No, but Bill Gates, he is the originator of this idea. And he has an interesting past. He was a industrial spy during the Cold War. He's a former communist that was he worked at AMD and Intel and was copying chip blueprints and handing it off to the Cubans to help with the revolution, which he eventually came to solution with. And they have the documentary they made about it in Argentina called El Crazy Che. But he ended up, at the end of all this, it's this big, big, long story. And at the end of all this, he ended up spending 3 years in a U.S. federal prison. And it was in this time that he actually discovered the rope hypothesis and freaked out when he discovered it and scribbled it down. And I think that's where he got the name El Crazy Che, because he went so crazy when he got so excited when he discovered it. But that's its origin. I mean, it's rare to have such a unique idea, but as far as I can tell, it's coming purely from the mind of Bill Gates.
He didn't also invent paste pecani sauce, did he?
Yeah.
No, that was in New York City.
No, get a rope.
Oh, that's right. Thank you.
David got it.
Always over my head. But like, what was the inspiration for it, though? Can you say, like, I mean, was there sort of a precursor to it, or some sort of missing link, if you will, that would make it more understandable as to how he got the notion?
I think it started out with his parents were atheists, and he would always argue with theists, and he wanted a bulletproof argument, but he could never really have one. And I think through this process of trying to create a bulletproof argument, he actually started getting into physics, and then he started coming up with all these arguments against the current mode of physics. But as far as the thread theory, I think gravity was the first thing that he zoned in on, because how do you explain attraction with particles? The Earth shoots particles at me. How does that attract me to the Earth? It doesn't make any sense. Or you have warped space-time in the case of Einstein. And I think he conceived of the idea of connections between atoms, and eventually he conceived the idea of ropes. So you have torsion. When the atom pumps, it expands and contracts. When it expands, it incorporates more thread from the surrounding ropes. When it contracts, it releases that thread, and that torques the end of those ropes. And that torsion is what light is, and the tension along the ropes, the aggregate tension, is what gravity is. So I think it started with gravity and just developed from there.
That's interesting. Wow, that's pretty awesome. And what is the website again for that?
For Bill Gates' website, or for
Rational Physics, or Bill Gates, or both?
Yeah, there's a group on Facebook, Rational Scientific Method. But for Bill Gates' website, it's called YouStupidRelativist.com.
Oh, that's right. I remember reading that. That was pretty funny. That's a great name.
Yeah.
And I guess real quick, we're got 3.5 minutes left, and we're going to save Bitcoin for after the show. A lot of our listeners are off air anyway. Really excited to get to that, though. We're going to talk about Bitcoin Classic. Have you heard of Miles Mathis?
I have. Actually, Mike Huttner, who's coming down to speak, is really into Miles Mathis. I have not looked into him as much as Mike has, but he's a huge fan of Miles.
Oh, man. Well, I hope and he's not going to be an actual Narcopulco, is he?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Man. Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about the physics. I mean, I've read a little bit of what Miles Mathis talks about. I mean, I don't know if it jives with rational physics. I know he has a very different take on mainstream physics and thinks a lot of it is wrong.
That's one of the names of the characters on a show that was on Netflix or something called Revolution.
Really? Interesting.
I was on that show.
I wonder if that's connected.
Oh, were you?
That was an extra.
Yeah, that's all right. They filmed it here. One of the main characters is named Miles Mathis.
That's interesting. Well, this guy, you should check out milesmathis.com. Whether he's right or wrong about the physics, I will say real quick that he's gotten. I don't necessarily agree with everything. And some of the stuff is difficult because he talks about fake photographs, and he could be right. But really interesting, open-minded stuff about historical events and conspiracy. And I will say he's got an article on how the modern art movement and international art market are basically a big what do you call it, money laundering scam, and it totally makes sense. But yeah, check that out. And I guess real quick too, you said there's a grand unified theory. I'm curious too. We talked briefly about the anthropic principle off air. What's your take on that? Does this rational theory have anything to say on that? And I know Bill Gates himself is atheist, but to me, the multiverse concept, which again is an artificial construct, is the only thing that could really make the anthropic principle not potential evidence for God. What's your comment on that?
So the anthropic principle is. Could you explain that real quick?
Well, basically, the anthropic principle. There's a microscopic and macroscopic level of it. It's on the macroscopic level. It's the fact that the Earth is just the right distance from the sun, just the right size, et cetera, for life. On the microscopic level, although I guess macroscopic too, that if the values for the forces and masses of particles and stuff, and of course this is mainstream physics, but were any different, life would not be able to form. So basically, the universe is just so that life can form. And they usually kind of hand wave that away by saying, well, there's an infinite number of universes, so we just happen to be in one that conforms to life. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think that infinity, I don't think that works in any context because it's assuming that the overall thing doesn't really have shape. You can't conceptualize it. But I do think that in the Fred theory universe, it's eternal. So there's no Big Bang theory, there's no creation event, there's no beginning, and there's no end.
Interesting.
And what that means is that the atoms and the universe are constantly rearranging themselves. And Mike Huttner